Hi, welcome to Math as a Language. In today's video, we're going to continue our talk of special pairs of angles. We started this discussion in a few earlier videos. We're going to just continue on here and try to finish off this topic today, if you will. All right, so special pairs of angles. All right. The first thing we want to do is a real quick review. A really quick review. We had our line, and we had an angle that emanated from the line, from the point on the line, which generated two angles that were next to each other. And so angle 1 and angle 2. So these two angles would be a special pair, and they would be a linear pair. Linear pair. All right. So that was our first special pair of angles, our linear pair. Then we went ahead and took a look at what happens if we had two lines intersect, a line L here and perhaps another line M coming across this way. And of course we know that we'll go ahead and use a different color here. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so it goes without saying that we have a number of linear pairs here. 1 and 2, 2 and 3, and so forth and on. And these two angles, now whatever linear pair you pick, let's just go ahead and take these two guys here that are next to each other. So these two angles, angles 1 and 2 and 3, would make up the line M. They total 180 degrees, and those two angles would be supplementary. So we talked about supplementary angles. Supplementary angles. Supplementary angles. And that was the second set of special pairs, the supplementary angles. But look, please note we did make the point that the supplementary angles, they don't need to be adjacent. All we know is that the supplementary angles have to total 180 degrees. So whether the angles are next to each other or not, if they total 180 degrees, that would be fine for them to be supplementary. So if we have an angle 1 sitting here that has 150 degrees sitting in degrees to it, and we have a second angle across the way, it doesn't have to be next to each other, they don't have to share a common side, and that angle is 30 degrees, then of course the 150 and the 30, these two angles would still be supplementary because they total a 180. So it has to do with the sum of the measures, not the location of the angles. Okay. And then finally, our third look at some special pairs, again had to do with intersecting lines. We had a line R perhaps heading this way, and a line S heading down this way. But this time, rather than looking at the supplementary angles or those angles that are next to each other, we looked at the angles that were across from each other. In this case, we have an angle here. Let's call that angle 5 perhaps. And we had another angle across from it, angle 6. These two angles also have a special name. They're a special pair of angles, and those are referred to as vertical angles. So those were our vertical angles. Vertical angles are angles that are across the way from each other, formed by two intersecting lines. So 5 and 6 were vertical, and of course these guys across the way here, they're also vertical angles, and we make sure the tick marks are the same because those vertical angles are congruent. So vertical angles are congruent. Okay, congruent meaning they have the same equal measures. So vertical angles are congruent. All right, let's finish off the topic of special pairs of angles by looking at one other set situation, if you will. We're going to go ahead and draw an angle. We're going to make an angle here, and we're going to make the one ray going this way, another ray going there, and we're going to go ahead and put a box here. Now by putting that box there, that indicates that this is a special angle. In this case, that by putting that box here, we're talking about a right angle. All right, so that's a right angle. Okay, now if we have a right angle, the measure of a right angle is 90 degrees. All right, so if the angle is a right angle, it has 90 degrees to it, then that box would indicate there. Now it's very important, this is again one of those subtle points in geometry. If you make an angle, let's say that we make an angle here, and it's important that you recognize this. If you put this angle there and that box is not drawn there, you are not assured that this is a right angle. So do not assume that it's a right angle just because it looks like it is. That is to say, that box, this box must be there. That's a very important symbol in the geometry. It's that box that indicates that it's a right angle. All right. So let's go ahead and now we're going to do, let's we're going to use the same one. So now we know that it's a right angle, it has the box, and then we draw a ray. Let's say we draw a ray emanating from it here like this. Okay, so now we have this angle, it's a right angle with the box, and we have two angles now. We have an angle 1 here and an angle 2. These two angles together, of course, make up the right angle, and therefore that in itself gives these guys a special designation. So angles 1 and angle 2 are said to be complementary. So angle 1 and angle 2 are complementary. And complementary indicates that the two angles, and there's only two angles, and the sum of the measures of those two angles total 90 degrees. To be complementary means that it totals 90 degrees. So that 90 degrees is very important to the complementary nature, just as being supplementary is an indication that it totals 180 degrees. Two angles that total 180. Okay, and one little mnemonic that would be helpful to remember these. Again, in the geometry, we have lots of definitions, and they're very important that the terms is a special part of the geometry. Again, you'll have more. We'll talk more about axioms and idioms and corollaries and all the rest. But so anything that can help you remember is always a good thing. And the one thing I like to do, we like to do here, is to say that if you have C, C comes before S. Okay, so complementary is 90. Okay, and the S supplementary indicates 180. If you need it, that's fine. If not, don't worry about it. But one way of remembering complementary, supplementary as you go through your geometry. All right, let's finish off with the one last point now. Again, these two angles are complementary, and we want to end on this note that the complementary aspect has to do with the total measure of the angles, and therefore if you have two angles, even if they're not next to each other, if you know that angle 1 is sitting here and angle 1 measures 60 degrees, and you have a second angle and they're not necessarily next to each other, let's say angle 2 is here, all right, and angle 2 measures 30 degrees. All right, the second angle has 30 degrees in it. The fact that the 60 plus the 30, that this total is 90, that makes these two angles complementary. So complementary angles do not have to be adjacent. If they're adjacent, they're fine. If they're not adjacent, if they're not next to each other, that's okay too. But in this case, let's go ahead and say let's use a different number only because we've used 1 and 2 before. So we're going to call this angle 3. This guy would be 4. So angle 3 and angle 4 are still complementary because the sum of their measures is 90 degrees. So those two angles are complementary. All right, I think that should do it for now. That concludes our look at special pairs of angles. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video. Okay, take care.